My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Steve Whiteside. It's July 29th, 2024, and we're at Bella Vida 360 in Yamhill. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome. Great to be here with you.
First question, why wine?
Gosh, that's a great question. Well, why not wine, of course. And I think, I was really fortunate. The thing that drew me into the wine in Oregon was the community that's around the wine scene. I was fortunate enough to be able to meet a gentleman by the name of Jim Maresh, who's one of the pioneers of the Pinot Noir business. Although he was a farmer. Even though he worked for Dun & Bradstreet, he just loved to farm, and he farmed as much as 400 acres and hazelnuts and cherries. And he has great stories about how he was really kind of forced into the wine, not the wine business, but the grape business. The actually farming aspects of that was the Columbus Day storm that knocked all of his hazelnut trees down. So I met him through his daughter-in-law, Suzanne Marsh, who was a physical therapist. I actually knew her in Arizona. And that because I was working there as an orthotist, prosthetist, making artificial limbs, external braces for backs and limbs, and really focused on the orthotic side of it and the specialty of working with kids, pediatrics. And she ended up marrying David, his second son. And she said, well, one day, why don't you think about maybe moving up to Oregon? At the time I was married to Allison, and we could grow wine and grow old together, just retire up there. And I thought, hey, that sounds like a great idea, but Allison and I enjoyed wine. So I went up by myself like a week later. And
what year was this?
This was in 1992. Okay. And I found myself walking up Jim Marsh's driveway. And he was walking down the driveway to greet me. He's Midwest, and that was his behavior, that was his fabric to do that. And Jim is like 5 foot, at the time was probably 5'8", 160 pounds, and gives me a big hug and one of those back slaps that sting, that make you stand up completely straight, and said, hey, any friend of David's a friend of mine. Come on up, let's drink some Pinot. And I said, Jim, it's 10:30 in the morning. He goes, that's okay, we'll drink Riesling. So I get up onto his porch, he cracks open a bottle of his Riesling. And I really didn't know that much about any of the wines from the Oregon area. In fact, I actually questioned Suzanne. I lived in Oregon. The dryer was running all the time because it rained so much as a kid. And I said, there's just no way in heck that they're going to be able to make a decent wine. And I'd really not been introduced to Pinot Noir either. Anyway, so we sat up on his deck and looked over the Willamette Valley from the Dundee Hills. And, it's like 72 degrees, the wind's blowing, grape leaves are kind of rustling, making that nice sound that they make when the wind moves them around. And I'm thinking, this is pretty sweet. I thought, what we'll do is we'll just buy some land right next to Jim Marsh, and, not knowing that they weren't making a lot of land in the Dundee Hills. And so we spent 2 years looking for property. And it was like, I just want to be in this environment. I want to be in this community, because Jim and Loie, great people and great pillars of the farming community, were telling me these stories about how everybody would have, Dick Erath would be harvesting in November, because that's when they harvested back in the 80s, in late 80s, early 90s, in the middle of the rain, and he would need a crawler so that he could deal with this kind of clay loam soils, the Jory soils. And it would be nothing to have Dick come down and borrow his Caterpillar and go and yard the fruit out so that it could go and get into the winery and be made into wine. He told me stories about some of the, bless Dick, he's gone now, but some of the wines that really didn't please his palate. And it was funny the way he talked about it, because he would tell a story And it would get to the point where he'd get to the punchline, but all the build-up, his eyes are tearing because he's laughing so much about this story and getting Dick and just kind of, respectfully talking about not so good wine. And, that's what it was, though, at the very beginning, is people were working so hard to make these wines, not knowing a lot about what varietals would even ripen in this area, let alone which varietals would make good wines, white or red. And as they struggled to find out which wines were going to fit in this area, they made some tasteless or tasteful mistakes in the process of vinifying wine. So anyway, to hear Jim talk about how everybody would help everybody else out. A quick story, Arthur Weber and Vivian Weber just lived down the street from them. And Arthur was a prankster. He calls up Jim and says, Jim, I need to see you and Loie. I need to talk to you about something. And Jim and Loie looked at each other, so, oh my God, what could possibly be wrong? And they decided that they better take their checkbook with them because Arthur may need some help, financial help. And so they go down to the house, and Arthur marches them out to the shed, the barn, and shows him his brand new tractor. All he wanted to do is show off his brand new tractor. And of course, they laughed about it. They never knew that Jim and Loie had brought their checkbook down and were more than willing to write a check for whatever they needed to help them succeed. I mean, it's kind of hard to not be successful in a community when you have, that much support. And lending equipment, although it wasn't the best thing to do because phylloxera was a mite that would end up traveling and it would be in the dirt that would be stuck on your tractor or your disc or your spring-tooth harrow. They would follow down the road and end up at somebody else's vineyard. Unfortunately, they just didn't know that. And everything was not on grafted root. It was all on their own root stock. So why wine? I mean, you got just a little bit of insight how I was kind of magically drawn, or fortunately drawn, to Jim Maresh and Loie Maresh and the community that they lived in, and also the community that they represented. And Jim Maresh was not in it for the money. Jim Maresh was in it to be able to interact with people, to share his stories, to actually learn from other people about what they did. He was just a curious man. He was kind of like a scientist, where he was always looking at, was always looking at the whole of where he was at, as opposed to just kind of this, that, or the other thing. He was a still water runs deep guy with a great sense of humor, just an unbelievable sense of humor. So for me, I was able to make the acquisition of his neighbor's land, 35.8 acres. It was part of a 55.8 acre parcel, and that was in 1996. And there wasn't a heck of a lot going on Warden Hill Road. There was Cameron Winery. John Paul was just a real character and a fun guy. I remember he showed up at Loie's wake. She passed away in 2000. It was actually a life celebration party for her with a 12-pack of beer. I think it was Red Stripe. It was like the most ridiculous brand. It had nothing to do with Oregon, and it wasn't cold, and he was walking around just offering it to people, and things would, a can would fall out. I think it was a 12-pack, and the can would stay there. It didn't get picked up. But anyway, it was just memorable and enjoyable for me to be able to be his neighbor. And back to the land, just to give you an idea how influential and how powerful Jim Maresh was in the community, is that Al Seward, who's passed now, was sitting down at his dining room table when I came in, because I was so concerned that I wasn't going to be able to buy this property, and I wanted it like desperately because of being able to be next to Jim and Loie and just kind of having something to work on. I've always liked working on project, hence the Bella Vida 360 project that we've got going on now. But he was actually sitting down with Al, telling him how he was going to sell that property to me. This is what you're going to do. Al, you're asking too much. This is a much fairer price to do that. And it's like he basically took me and Allison to the altar and allowed us to be able to snap that parcel up. And quick follow-up after that, maybe the same day I closed the deal, I went across to Dick Eras, and they at the time had this big oak tree stump that you could climb up on. And I climbed up on this stump that looked directly at the property I just bought. And I said, oh my God, what have I done? Because there was nothing there but poison oak, blackberries, scrub oak, rocks, hillsides. And it was like, at the time, it was like 900 feet, which was out of the sweet zone for growing Pinot Noirs. And so, I was nervous about it. I mean, at the time I was, 47 years old and had my career, which I was in Arizona. So I knew I was going to be an absentee owner. And it was, I just sold the business and had, agreements where I had to stay on and meet numbers and all. I was busy in Arizona, but I thought, what the heck, let's give it a whirl, roll the dice and see what we can do with it. And absolutely loved it. I had a picture of, what Bella Vida was going to look like in my mind, and I pursued that picture. And there are a few people said, how did you figure this out? How did you do this? Because I did a tremendous amount of work myself, both because of the expense of it, and also too, if you own something, it's not just because you have a title to it, it's because you built it. And it's part of you, and it's part of the passion that you have. And, farming's fun. I was raised in a golf course type of an environment, so I knew about tractors and mowers and equipment and stuff. And, there is something about the smell and the feel of fresh tilled soil. It is pretty heartwarming to me anyway. I enjoyed it a lot. And Jim Maresh says, there's the best thing for me, Steve, is when I look across and I see you on your tractor and I'm on my tractor and we're both smiling and waving at each other. And it's just like, yeah. And then he'd pop into a story about how there was a red hawk sitting waiting for him, or a buzzard sitting on the fence post waiting for him to die so they could eat him. Anyway, Jim would just come up with stuff inadvertently. So why wine? It was the love for the Maresh family, specifically Jim and Loie. And also, too, the surprise that I had when I first tasted Oregon Pinot Noir, Chardonnay at the time was not as popular, didn't have as strong a voice as it does now. But Chardonnay were good, and the Riesling was absolutely. It wasn't really a super, sweet wine. Didn't have a lot of residual sugar to it, but it had that ripe fruit sweetness that it had that really brought a nice kind of viscosity to it. And yeah, it had that diesel to it, and it was really, really fun stuff. So yeah, that's wine for me.
So we're going to pick it up there in a second. I want to back up for a minute and talk a little bit about life before wine. You mentioned the career before it. Tell me about where you're born and raised and how you found yourself on the path you did, doing the first career.
I was born in Soap Lake, Washington, which is, in the eastern part of Washington, and moved over to Tacoma and was able to experience the aroma of Tacoma from the pulp mill for my first 4 years of my life. I moved over when I was 1 year old. And from there, I moved to Coos Bay, Oregon. And then from there, Newport. Agate Beach was just up the road. My dad owned Agate Beach Golf Club, a little 9-hole course there. And we spent our summers pulling 100-pound hoses around, making sure everything was as green as it could be, and mowing the greens and getting the needles, the pine needles off the grains. And anyway, it was a good experience for me because I was able to work outside and actually learn and how to use some of the equipment, which benefited me when I got into the viticultural side of my life. From there, we moved to Coquille. And, it was really, Coquille was dependent upon the lumber industry, and the lumber industry had its ups and downs in the late 50s, early 60s. And so we ended up venturing down to Arizona. It was kind of the land of opportunity. Dad was a teaching pro, golf pro, and got a job down there. And the family was separated for about 6 months before we could actually move down to there and be reunited together. And then I just basically bumped around and jumped around in Maricopa and ended up living in Scottsdale. Vietnam War was something that I had to be concerned about, and was had the option at the time to either enlist or roll the dice with the draft. And I wish I would have rolled the dice, because I think it was 396 out of, which only goes to 365, but I was 296 or something like that in the draft, so there was just no way, it was in 69, that I was going to make it. But I did join the Air Force, or Air National Guard, and spent time in the Air National Guard, 6 years as a matter of fact, and found that to be very frustrating as well as enjoyable. Frustrating in the sense that it gave me a chance to kind of see just kind of the Peter principle in action, where you got promoted whether you did what you were supposed to do or not. It was just because you were in that seat for that period of time. It's different now, but at the time that was my experience, and that was frustrating. But also I was in civil engineering, so we were doing construction, we were doing actual framing, we were doing masonry, doing plumbing. Decided that I wanted to be my own boss, and got into entomology, which is basically a pest exterminator in that, which was fun for me to be able to do. And summer camp, we all did what needed to be done, and that was construction. And then because of the golf business, I was actually working at a driving range while I was going through high school, and I met a gentleman by the name of Don Grove, who had his own kind of apothecary. It was a combination of orthopedic shoes, it was traction equipment, hospital beds, oxygen, corsets, back braces, some we called an off-the-shelf type of bracing system. But he also had what's called a brace shop. They're not called brace shops anymore, they're actually orthotic clinics, but he asked me to go to work for him because that was really good in where he taught us to be respectful and to hustle and to kind of anticipate. Yes, sir, no, ma'am. Grab their clubs for them, wash, make sure they're clean before they give them back, give them the instructions they need, make sure that they felt comfortable, at the golf course. And that was the way I kind of was, because that's the way I was trained. So Mr. Grove came in. Yes, Mr. Grove. No, Mr. Grove. Can I take your clubs out for you? Can I get you an extra, you want a small bucket of balls after you get through these? Hustle sodas for him because it was hot. It was in Arizona. And I would, he asked my dad, he says, I like Steve. Would he consider working for me? And I'll ask him. And I said, heck yeah, I'll work for 40 hours a week instead of 70 hours a week. Not working the weekends, I'm in high school. It's like, what's a date? Because I have no time for that. It saved me a lot of money, but, So anyway, Mr. Grove put me to work for him. And long story short, Vietnam War was going on prior to that. It was really ramped up. Lots of injuries along with the casualties. The government needed to be able to have orthotists and prosthetists to take care of these unfortunate patients now because of the armed conflict that were injured in. The armed conflict part of it was very beneficial with regards to improving orthotic and prosthetic components, bringing computers into regulating knee joints for people who have amputations above the knee, and suspension systems for people below the knee that would not have been developed if they did not have these arm conflicts and the subsequent injuries. Terrible way to bring technology and update technology, but that's just some of the collateral benefits that you get from stupid wars and unfortunate conflicts. So anyway, I was able to go to UCLA and Northwestern University to get my formal education in orthotics, sat for my certification in 1972, became certified, and then continued to work for a gentleman by the name of Bill Riley, who bought Grove Surgical, and decided that perhaps maybe I'd like to have my own business. So a couple other guys from Grove Surgical, my brother and I, also worked at Grove Surgical. Over about a year period, opened our own orthotic and prosthetic facility, and actually had it for 20 years, 76 to 96. Was part of the actual professional side of, or the certification, the credentialing side of it. Worked real hard to change the testing from hands-on fabrication, building stuff, to more clinical. So what and how was replaced with the why side of it. So we had all three of those components. Residency programs started in orthotics where people would spend 2 years with a mentor. I was a residency director for years. I served as president for the organization. I worked with the National Commission on Orthotic Prosthetic Education. So I was very, very involved in that, but I loved it. I mean, it was a great gig. I mean, people would walk into your facility and they couldn't walk because of pain, and when they left 2 or 3 weeks, they didn't stay at your facility that long, but once you were finished with them, 2-3 weeks later, their functional level was high, their pain level was diminished significantly, so that they could have kind of as close to the old quality of life that they had before. And working with kids, I mean, they didn't have anything to compare it to. You work with somebody who's 40 years old, 45, and they're a spinal cord injury because they were racing motorcycles, things that they love doing, and they get pretty bitter adult. They're a pretty bitter adult when they're through with that, and rightfully so. I don't want to take that away from them. But kids, their norm was being, functionally abnormal. So they were very appreciative of what you did. So were the parents. So that was good. And so I did that for almost 50 years. I sold the company. 20 years later, was able to do the vineyard development. That's what it takes to do a vineyard. You have to kind of sell your company to be able to do that. And so, in 1992, I started coming to Oregon. I knew I wanted to retire here because I lived here before and know how beautiful it is, and still argue today you'll probably have to cut this because I think it's the best place to spend your summer, although we don't want a lot of people up here joining us. But I do. I mean, it's just absolutely, there's so many things to do. It's so beautiful. And so, so that was kind of how I got from my first part of my life, professional life, into the wine business. And I worked for 20 years in the orthotic and prosthetic business while I was developing Bella Vida. And so the plan was to become a good farmer, grow great grapes. I think I said in my interview with the Newburgh paper, I wanted to grow the best damn Pinot Noir grapes in Oregon. And it was like I didn't realize the background of Newburgh and the religious history of Newburgh. But they printed it. So I was, I figured it wasn't so bad. So I went with it. Then we got to a couple of times as a result of the Pinot Noir celebration here, spend some time with that organization, with the lunches that they did. We had a couple of lunches at our vineyard, and then in 2018, they did a comparison between the Van Duzer area, the Ola Hills, Pinot Noir, winemaking, flavor, style, and kind of experience compared to the Dundee Hills, which is a much, much warmer site. So Brian O'Donnell from Belpont, Lynn Maresh from Jackson Wines at the time, and then Patrick Reuter all made wine from my fruit, from my vineyard. And Patrick and Lynn Maresh had vineyard designates. Brian O'Donnell has got his own sandbox and he likes it that way. Makes absolutely wonderful wines, consistent wines, and was one of our winemakers when we did our winemaker series at Bella Vida. Brian was there, and so they had this, six-person panel of winemakers, one representing Yamhill Hills, the other representing the Dundee Hills, and 500 participants on Friday and 500 participants on Saturday at the Pinot Noir celebration. And they talked about, it wasn't who gets to win, it was just an education program. But Dundee Hills did a pretty good job of showing up. And, Patrick Reuter, you got to spend time with him if you get a chance. He's just a phenomenal winemaker, does a beautiful job of explaining how the acids, tannins, and fruit flavors lay on your mouth. He actually does drawings of and colors those, and it's very easy to understand when he does that. Each one of the acid has a certain symbol, and the tannin has a certain symbol, and the position on the tongue. Anyway, it's a great education. Lynn Maresh, she holds her own, and that woman is one hell of a good winemaker and a real strong person. Strong in her passion for Pinot Noirs. And then Brian O'Donnell's businesslike, and he's just kind of a fuzzy guy. He's just a really nice gentleman. Consistent wines, I think that's the most impressive part about his wines, especially when he made them for us at Bella Vida, they had that beautiful red cherry. It was consistently there. His was the only wine of the three winemakers that we had that had that barnyard funk to it and that amazing silky smoothness when you tasted it. It was such a contradiction. God, that smells bad. Damn, it tastes better than it smells. Damn, it tastes good. So that was a fun part of it, because I didn't know about barnyard until I met, Brian O'Donnell. And then some of the wines have barnyards. Some people go to the end of the universe to find those wines. And it's nice to see that we're able to represent one of those out of Bella Vida.
You mentioned being interested in wine before getting into the industry. Tell me about your sort of level of interest, level of knowledge of the world of wine before your visit to the marshes.
Well, it was, basically screw top and chateau cardboard. It was, not very deep at all. And I had the opportunity at a restaurant in Phoenix to have a bottle of Silver Oak. Mm-hmm. And that bottle was in 1982. And it was their cab blend, and it was $25 for that bottle in the restaurant. And this was a very nice restaurant. And so I was able to experience that, and it was absolutely delicious. It was to the point where I'm going to go find out where this is made. So I went over to Napa, and actually went there just before they were closing, and I begged the lady to let me in, and she let me in. And who was there other than Justin Myers, finishing off what was left after the day was over with, and started talking with him, and ended up buying a case of wine and learning how not to store wines. Unfortunately, I think I ruined 9 of the 12 bottles. So, because I wanted to keep them, and I wanted to age, and I wanted to see just exactly what happened. Unfortunately, when you have a girlfriend that turns her air conditioning off in the middle of the day in Arizona in the middle of the summer to save money, with the wine sitting next to an Arcadia door, which is a big glass door, sliding door, anyway, it didn't last as long as it was. And I remember how proud I was of that, and took it to Maitre D and asked him to try it, and he couldn't say anything to me because he didn't want to hurt my feelings, and I was that green at the time. Once I started coming up to Oregon, and drinking more Pinot Noirs and kind of stepping outside Dundee Hills. I remember going down the Yola Hills and enjoying that particular area. And then, it was before we had AVAs. I think AVAs came around, 2005 or something like that, or 4. We just kind of went to like the known places like Ponzi, Willikinzie. Although, I remember going into Amity and his name skips me. He's the funniest guy.
Myron Redford?
Myron, yes. Myron, God, he's a hoot. Going into his place, and he had a bunch of different wines, and he made a ton of different wines. And it's not like I really had an appreciation for him, but it was kind of interesting. It was really kind of an adventure. Kind of reminds me of the first time that I tried barrel tastings, and it was like, holy cow, I'm going to have to drink this stuff, because it was like 6 months in the barrel and very acidic, but you could get that ribbon of fruit that always seemed to stay up, and you watched the acids, the tannins integrate, and boy, what a great learning experience. Here you are wanting to grow the best Pinot Noir grapes and best damn Pinot Noir grapes in Oregon, and then you're exposed to a barrel tasting at 6 months, and you get this kind of young harshness that Pinots represent because of the acid levels and the tannin levels they have in it. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to be successful with something like that? And then you understand what patience has to do with it, and also the evolution, just the biology of what wine goes through to get from that state to actually a finished state. And as a result of that, I kind of found and was able, fortunately, to do that, to at least wait 3 years before I offered my wines, and preferred to wait 5 years before I offered my wines up, and found out that although there was a lot of conversation about how wines do in a barrel, there wasn't much conversation about, unless you were Dick Erath, because he believed that wines did better in the bottle than they did in the barrel. And so that was, I thought, a really nice representation of Dick's hypothesis, or his belief about it. So now it's like 5 years is when we start drinking our wines, and like my tardies, well, I've had them 15 years old, and they're just stunning. Just stunning. Vintage is like 2005, which I don't have any left of because it was so darn good. I just ended up drinking it and actually being so excited about it, sharing it with other people that appreciated wines, which is the other side of being able to have a cellar and be able to have, the ability to, for lack of a better word, capture these wines and keep them hostage until you're ready to drink them or share them with somebody else. And, Jim, he passed away, and I think he was 96 years old, and he used people would ask him, Jim, what wines do you cellar? And he says, hell, I'm not cellaring any wines. I'm 96 years old. I'm drinking everything I can right now. I don't know how much longer I'm going to last. And it's like, it's fun to try to save wines to see how long they'll last, but and it's also for an education, just to kind of get an understanding what happens to wine when it turns, how it loses fruit. It's just wood and alcohol, and how important it is to catch it before it gets to that point. Another thing too is having a tasting room and having customers and having clients and having wine club members. I really felt it was my responsibility to let my people know, my clients and my club members, when these wines needed to be drunk, and not let them get to the point where they really missed it, the opportunity to enjoy the wines. And it's the same thing, it's like there's a lot of conversation about barrel time and hang time, and there's a lot to be respected with regards to the right time and knowing what the right time is, and having a vineyard and having a association with winemakers. I remember one of the wines that we wanted to do, At Bella Vida, it's a field blend where everything goes in the same fermenter. It's co-fermented. And that basically it's the two ways that I understand how Pinot is made. Either it's blended by the winemaker before it goes into the bottle, or it's blended right at harvest prior to fermentation. And I wanted to have a wine that was reflective of my site and my farming abilities, so I took 2 rows from the very top of my vineyard to the very bottom that had all 7 clones on I growed, 800 feet at the top, or almost 880, down to 600 feet. We'd pick them all at the same time, and one of the things that Jim Maresh kind of always mentioned was, well, there's a couple things. One, you always had to clean, cultivate. Number 2 is you had to let the grapes hang, and you had to let them stay in the barrel for long periods of time. Well, the 2012 vintage, which was an absolutely stunning year for Pinot Noirs in Oregon and specifically in the Dundee Hills, Patrick Reuter was making what I call my 2-row cuvee, that wine from the top of the vineyard to the very bottom of it. And he called me up one day and he said, Steve, he says, I know on your label you want to talk about barrel time, and I know you want to talk about hang time. He says, but this wine needs to go in the bottle, and it needs to go in the bottle now. It can't wait another 6 to 9 months to do it. He says, I've done this before where I've missed that opportunity. Yeah, it's a gut feeling and there's some science about it from the lab, but I just really think you need to consider it. And I said, I grow the grapes, you make the wine. I'm not going to step in your arena, and if you want to step in mine to help me, that's great. I don't mind that, but you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And so we ended up doing it, and it's a good thing that we did. Good thing we did, because I think it actually not necessarily saved the wine, but allowed that wine to show just how good that wine can be by paying attention to the important things and knowing when a wine needs to go or should go into a bottle. So anyway, I was impressed with that, his ability to do that.
You mentioned obviously buying the property with a long-term vision, because the short-term was a lot of work. So tell me about the vision for the place when you bought it. What did you foresee it becoming, and what were the sort of the significant steps along the way? Yeah,
so we looked at, you got to grow good grapes, because you can't make good wine unless you have good grapes. We were a little bit nervous about our elevation, and because most of the premium land, or the belief at that time was 400 to 600 feet, and 600 feet was actually at the high end of it. That's where we started. You wanted to have east and southeast facing slopes, southeast, east and southeast, or south facing slopes, and we were mostly west facing slopes on ours. We did have a little bit, just a slight amount of a north slope, but it was like kind of just a consequence of a little dip in the land. It wasn't anything kind of significant. We were very steep too. We had some very, very steep, and in talking with other vineyard managers, the advice was is that you make the land do what you want to do. In other words, if you have a west-facing slope, you cut your rows north and south. Mm-hmm. You don't cut them east and west. East and west would have been a lot safer to farm. You wouldn't have cultivation. You wouldn't have terracing, which adds a significant point of danger to a tractor operation. Although I used a farm crawler, which is a cleated steel belt, not tired piece of equipment, a Landini. But oh my God, your teeth would shake, and you chip your teeth on some of the things that you hit a rock and it would just jolt you, because there's absolutely no suspension. But it was good. It was stable. It was safe. I intentionally set my rows up, the widths of my rows at the time. People were putting the plants closer together, narrower rows. I specifically set my rows at 8 feet so that I could have 2-foot terraces and not worry about having to slide off of them. The dirt that starts on the top of the row, ends up at the bottom of the row, which ends up at the next row below it type thing. Gravity takes it all downhill. And so you're having to do a lot of maintenance, and it's more for safety and also too for your distribution of your sprays. If you get too much of an angle, they just don't fall into the fruit zone, where if you're right perpendicular to the plant, you're not at an angle like this, then you're able to get better localizing of the sprays, which are absolutely critical to manage the diseases that we deal with. So yeah, we wanted to be good farmers first. Then the second thing was actually have a label presence or make wine. And for us, being absentee owners and farmers, in a sense, I used to sneak away and have 3 or 4 day weekends so I could do what I needed to do in the vineyard. And then we also had a vineyard management company that allowed us to have the labor, because you just can't keep up with it yourself. When we first started, 5 acres, and then there was 10 acres, and then there was 15, and then there was 26 acres. When it had 5 acres, you could kind of do it. But you're looking at a minimum of 250 man hours per acre per growing season. And so you have to have 20 people come in at one time to be able to handle that for you. But anyway, we didn't want to build, we couldn't afford to build a winery, didn't know how to make wine at the time. We're just learning how to grow, and felt like it was a big enough struggle or challenge for us to make the decisions that last a lifetime. It was like getting married when you picked a clone of what kind of Pinot Noir. It's like, oh my God, or a rootstock, and you put them together and you plant them, and you just kind of hope everything's going to go well. And they had Pommard and Vainsville, the heritage clones, that were already well established. Dijon clones were just starting to get a little bit of a voice in the late 70s and late 80s. And so I figured, as a grower, seller of wines or grapes, I'm going to get the Dijon clones in first, so that the winemakers have a new resource to work with, and then fill in with Pommard and Vainsville, which I did, and I used the cuttings from Jim Marsh's number 1 and number 2 blocks that were his top Vainsville and Pommard block. Not having a winery or not having a label, we decided what we would do is, in order to get that label, it was an idea Jim Marsh gave me. He would give grapes to the winemakers, and they give him juice back in the bottle, finished. No money would change hand. It was just products. So it was kind of a nice cash flow program, because you didn't have to, nothing had to go out. You had to obviously pay for the bottles, you had to pay for the corks, you had to pay for the labels. But you didn't have to pay for barrels, you didn't have to pay for fermenters, you didn't have to pay for all the other things that it takes to make wine that are costly to make wine. And so we picked actually 3 winemakers. The first winemaker was Patty Green from Tory Moore. Stunning, stellar wines, just absolutely delicious, well integrated, nothing harsh about them right from the get-go. Aged well, obviously paired well with food. And so that was Tory Moore Winery. And then Brian O'Donnell from Bell Pond. Brian O'Donnell was making wines from Jim Marsh's fruit. And Brian and his wife Jill were just really neat people. Anyway, really interesting people. Brian worked for Microsoft, and I forget Jill. They actually met at an amateur beer brewing club. I think it was in California, and ended up in Oregon, because he just got bit by the bug. He just fell in love with the place and the Pinots and everything. And Brian was doing a really, really good job of amateur winemaking. And he was right at the cusp of, at the suggestion of his friends, you should do this for a career, because you do that well with your wines. And so he decided to do that. He had a little conversation with Jill, and I don't know how much longer he worked for Microsoft, but basically made the jump and started making wines in '96, I think it was, and has done well ever since. And doesn't have a tasting room. He does all of his tastings by appointment out of his winery. He has a couple events a year that he does. I think it's Memorial Day and Thanksgiving, and that's how people get to taste his wines and enjoy them. And he's very good at what he does, not braggadocious, humble as a matter of fact, but he definitely has his sandbox and he has control of it, meaning that he has his way he likes to do things, doesn't want to have interference, doesn't want a lot of noise from the wine business that can happen as a result of being successful. And he's very creative in what he does. So, and he was a friend of Jim and Loie's, and he made these great kind of raspberry cassis quality cherry-based wines that were just always ready to drink. I call it my parlor wine. You could open it up, anybody could drink it, they'd all like it. You wouldn't have to worry if it was going through a funky stage or not, whether the acids were up in it or the tannins were up in it. And so we picked him. And then Jay Summers happened. We actually met his girlfriend at a grocery store, and she was in charge of the wine in that particular department in the grocery store. And we were just kind of talking and said, we really like Jay's wines, and we would really like to make our wines for us. And we kind of do this bartering thing. We trade grapes and we get wine back in the bottle with our label on it, and we sell it through our tasting room. And she goes, let me talk with him. And so next thing you know, he calls me up, says, can we meet? I said, absolutely. So here he is in this Euro van, sandals, 2 German Shepherds, shorts, French beret, curly, not dreadlocks, but just curly little things coming out of it, and slender. And I think, oh, what did I do? He comes just kind of da-da-da-da out of his van, and dog's barking at me. I'm thinking, oh my God, what'd I do? Well, he hands me his business card. It says, Jay Summers, Jay Christer Wines, winemaker, lead guitarist. I'm thinking, this is going to work. This is going to work. And so we talked about it, and he was very excited because he was just starting his label. It was a good way for him to make these wines, not having to spend the money for the fruit, which is one of the more expensive parts of it. That between that and the barrel, it's mostly the cost. But so he started making wines for us in 2002. Our first vintage was 2001, and he cut his teeth with John Paul at Cameron Winery. And I think he was there for like 6 years as an assistant winemaker. And John Paul was honest, like all good winemakers are, and said, you're doing a good job. I can't teach you anymore. You might want to think about getting your own label. At least that's what I heard. That's how it went. Who knows, though, how it actually went. John Paul and Jay are really characters. So anyway, he was ready to do that, and we're excited to have him. And just of all 3 of the winemakers, I think does the best job of representing the terroir, what's going on with the different soils, the different horizons that we have, what's going on with the climate in that specific area, and just the whole footprint of our vineyard always ended up to be unique. And it was the thing I think I liked the most about his wines is that it was like a kaleidoscope. It just was, it would always change. And not, people say Pinot changes from bottle to bottle, and his did. I mean, it was amazing. And it went through its times when it was funky, and then come out of that, clean shaven and deodorant on and ready to present. And just an absolutely wonderful presentation. Always got this great earthiness to it, a little bit of brambliness, and kind of had that forest floor that people talk about in Pinot Noirs that was really, really consistent, really consistent. I talked about Tori Moore and Patricia Green. She fell off, and we went through Kelly Fox, Ryan Harms was also, Lynn Penner-Ash actually was consulting with Don Olson at the time at Tori Moore. I remember she came in, and some of our 777 was in the fermenter, and she goes, got some Dundee Hills fruit in here. I was like, okay, all right. So anyway, she ended up buying from us. And that's an interesting story, and had a relationship until we sold the vineyard in 2021. Finally in 2004, Jacques Tardy came on, 8th generation, Louis St. George, France, Burgundy. You can take the winemaker out of France, but you can't take France out of the winemaker. And made these really food-friendly, high acidic, aged well type of wines that at 3 years it was kind of hard to drink those compared to J. Christopher's and Brian O'Donnell's because they were much more integrated. But at 5 years it was like, where did this sleeper come from? So that kind of helped me with the understandings of aging of wine and integration that goes on with acids and tannins in the process of aging, both in the barrel and as well as the bottle. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we created a label by these three winemakers. We called it our winemaker series. They each got 3 clones. They put their spin on it as far as what they felt the wine would, how it would best present from our vineyard, and did it since 2001 until 2018, where at 2018 I decided to hold back a year just because we were getting a little bit too much inventory. And 2019 we didn't make any wine. 2020 we got smoked out. And that was another kind of a rude awakening. It was also another kind of a message, I think, to me, as far as I'm aging, my vineyard's aging. You have a $500,000 hit and you have that 3 years in a row, then that adds up quickly. And there were just so many things that were after my 25-year plan that I had that were kind of whispering and talking off my shoulder, saying, Steve, look at things are changing, and tractors are 25 years old, and trellis is 25 years. And oh, did you hear about this new red blotch that's coming through vineyards, and we don't really know what the vector is, and that you have to completely replant it? And oh, by the way, it's not $15,000 an acre to plant when you're doing it yourself. It's $50,000 to $70,000 to plant. Well, 26 acres times 50, that's $2.6 million. So, you start thinking about that. That's how we kind of ended up towards, selling the property to it. But that's how we got started in the wine business. The plan was, first we're going to be farmers. Second thing we're going to do is have a tasting room. Third thing we're going to do is have a place to live. Fourth thing we're going to do is a winery. We did everything except the winery, which was still quite a bit. And it was, the opportunity that I had to meet people, and especially the Mareshes, and the experiences that I had and the people I met by having the tasting room, despite how much work it was worth, every, scrape knuckle, every extra check that you had to write in the 2005s and the 2007s and the 2013s and 11s that were thrown at us by Mother Nature. So yeah, it was worth every bit of it for me.
You mentioned farming first. Tell me about learning to put in a vineyard and farm a vineyard.
Well, I had what was called my yard of books. It was basically 3 feet of books that I've acquired and started out with. There was a couple of editions that were put out. I don't know if it was by the Willamette Valley Winemakers Association or what, but it was actually growing grapes in Oregon.
The Oregon Grapegrowers Guide.
And I'll never forget Andy Humphreys, one of his chapters in there, talking about doing it right and making sure that you stick picked and make sure that you did your soil amendments. At the time, soil amendments were okay to do as far as adding man-made fertilizer to it, and dolomite and lime that help with the pH so that you get the proper bio environment in the soils themselves. I mentioned a little bit earlier, it was like getting married when you're picking clones and stuff. So I read about all the different clones. I read about all the different root stocks, early ripening, deep rooting, drought resistant, need to have a wet foot, all of that stuff. So I could dig the holes, the soil holes, to make a determination on what particular cultivar, clone, type of Pinot Noir, what rootstock is going to go best in this particular area. And I found a huge variation in topsoil depths throughout my vineyard. Yeah, some of it was like kind of, it's the top of a hill and things aren't growing very well. Yeah, there's not a lot of topsoil there, but you could do the amendments prior to having it in, although it is almost Herculean to have to change the soil structure. It takes years and decades and real focus to be able to make those changes happen. You can do it, but it's not just like adding a little bit of cow poop and little chicken poop and let's put some nitrogen in there and everything is happy. But anyway, so that's how I basically learned about the actual farming aspects of it, although the community was great. Alan Holstein was great as far as his information, his ideas that he would give me. He had a guy that worked for him, and I only knew him as Cabeza Grande. That's what the Hispanics that worked for me called him, which is big head. And Mark knew a lot of stuff about farming, but he let you know that he knew about it. He knew a lot. But anyway, but he was very helpful. I mean, and he'd call me up and say, Steve, I really like the speed that the tractor's pulling the disc through your vineyard at, And fortunately, I was on it. But I mean, it was nice. It was nice to know that stuff. The real reason I wanted to read and educate myself was so I could ask good questions. Farmers don't have a lot of extra time. Winemakers don't have a lot of extra time. And you're a newbie from out of state. I wanted to be able to capture that opportunity to extract as much as I possibly could, and at the same time be respectful to their time and to their mission as far as creating wines. And it takes time to make those, so I didn't want to be intrusive or interruptive with that stuff. So reading a lot to prepare myself to ask the right questions, keeping my ear open, not talking but listening, and taking everything into consideration, because every farmer has their own opinion of how things should be done. And so I just took what fit for me in the tasks of farming. And I got to admit, Jim Marsh was a big player in that, a big player in that, although it got to the point where I think I had some better ideas than he did, and I didn't want to be a jerk, disrespectful. So what I did is, he had 1 acre. I said, Jim, I want to learn to make wine, and you have your ideas about farming. I have my ideas about farming. Let me have that acre. I'll develop it. You tell me what you want to put in there. I get to put 2 picks. You get to get 2 picks, and we'll grow that. I'll farm that acre the way you want it to be farmed. And so we decided to do that. We ended up doing that, and it ended up becoming a special bottling. We called it TLC, not after Tender Loving Care, but Ted Leroy Crawford, who was a guy who worked for me and was a big part of the community. He washed his bologna and white bread sandwiches down with Pabst Blue Ribbon. It was just, and he was, anyway, I could talk to you 2 hours about Ted. Anyway, we ended up, when he passed away in 2012, we ended up doing a special bottling in his name, Ted Leroy Crawford, and donated $15 a bottle in his name to Newburgh Highs. It's a specific program where they have welding and they have graphic arts and they have a culinary program. And we ended up, we'd $15,000 a year would go, and they would buy high temperature dishwashers. They would buy computers so that they could do the processing they needed for the graphic arts, buy welding masks and gloves and those types of things for him. So it was a nice thing. But anyway, this wine it's a field blended wine. It's Pomard Vainsville 115 and 777 Dijon clones, and it's just an absolutely delicious wine. Serves a great cause, and it was one of the 5 Pinots that we made off of our property. So I don't know why I went down that horse trail, but I mean, it was a rabbit trail, but that was fun to do. So I learned a lot from my neighbors. I learned a lot, like I said, community drew me here. I really love being a part of that community, still am, in a way. Not as active as I used to be, but that's by choice, not because I pissed anybody off yet. Anyway, so yes, so that's how I learned that part of it. To be that was my part of being in the wine business, was actually the farming side of it. The other side, I didn't have a lot of joy or patience with the actual marketing, and I mean, I enjoyed the people, enjoyed telling the story, and enjoyed talking to them about Bella Vida and how we developed it. And I'd come in off the tractor and be kind of red, joy, soil-faced, in the mustache and the beard and everything, and talk with wine club members when they would show up. And yeah, that was a good part of it. I don't know if that's exactly what you needed to hear from me, but
absolutely,
that was a question that got me thinking about how big and vast the Bella Vida experience was. It was a learning experience, but I had a lot of help. I had a great community around me. Still do.
Okay, so you talked earlier about kind of getting to the end of Bella Vida and kind of having the signs that it was time to move on. So tell me about selling it, and tell me about this part, phase 2.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of did a inventory, much like I did when I started Bella Vida, and I had basically a 25-year plan, and we were coming up on 25 years, and it wasn't just because it was 25 years. I mean, what happens in a vineyard in 25 years is, plants get older, trellis systems get older, equipment gets older, and those all have to be replaced when you're doing it yourself, or you pay more to have somebody else do it. So, I looked at my equipment. Tractors are 25 years old. The buildings are 25 years old. The irrigation system that I had used since 2007 was just in shambles, and needed to be, it needed to be tended to. I was looking at some tax laws. I mean, there were some tax laws that were beneficial to me if I was to sell at that time. The presidents had changed, and it looked like taxes were going to go up as a result of that. I mentioned the red blotch that's out there, not necessarily haunting me, but you have to have a consideration. Anytime you saw, which was common for especially the end plants in Pinot Noirs, for the leaves to redden up at the end of the year. But to see one red plant or 8 red plants out there, you don't know if it's red blotch or just red leaves as a result of the plant shutting down. And so anyway, it was there thinking about it. And I was still doing a lot of the farming myself. And, 3 years ago, I was 71 years old, and it was harder to get up and down the crawler, having to run the business side of it and pay more attention to it. Getting away from the thing that I really, really enjoyed was starting to make it less fun to do. I mean, yeah, we had a great view. We had a great vineyard. We had a bocce court on the side. Neighbors would get together on Tuesday night, and we'd have a potluck and drink tons of good wine. And, Jim Maresh passed away. I used to go down to his house. In fact, I kind of had to stop during COVID going down to his house. But, I'd go down to his house on Wednesday and Sunday nights. And, we'd end up dancing in the kitchen together, 2 grown men, at the end of the night to Frank Sinatra, Fly Me to the Moon. That was like the send-off song for us. And, you'd have fried oysters. And Jim was a good cook. He thought he was a lot better than he was, but he was still enjoyable. One of the things that happens as people age is you'll hear their stories more frequently. And I would hear Jim's stories over and over again, but it's like I just never got tired of him because he was so genuine about him, and he'd laugh himself to tears telling the stories, and they were educational stories. He wasn't blowing his own horn. He was talking about his life experience, Navy stories, college stories, football stories. His son was a Navy pilot. stories about David putting a case of Pinot Noir in the front of his F4 Phantom jet, you know, flying across the United States just because he was training. You know, he needed to have a training mission. His wife, Loie, would have grown men because she would teach people who had reading issues, the ability to read issues, would stop in the store, and Mrs. Marsh with tears in her eyes saying, I would never have had a job if you hadn't taught me how to read. It's like, wow, what a wonderful, wonderful woman. And she just dedicated herself to making sure that other people got better as a result of her ability to see what needed to be done and making it fun for them. I mean, the way she got kids to read was getting a Hot Rod magazine for the guys, you know, and they would like to read those things because they were interested in doing it. It was just a matter of giving them the opportunity to succeed. So anyway, you know, with Jim being gone and all the extra work that had to be done, the aging out of me as well as the equipment, I had two boys that loved the wine but didn't want the work. And, you know, there was a lot of generational stuff. There were a lot of people that, you know, were selling. I mean, you know, Lynn Penner selling. It was huge. I mean, it's probably part of her plan, but, you know, you could see kind of the fabric changing. And now that I'm the fourth day on Warden Hill Road as far as distance from 99 and the amount of wineries between me, 12 wineries, they do 3-4 a day. That means I'm at the third or fourth day. Well, I don't know if I'm going to capture them before that. Not really being involved in social media, not really being heavily marketing, not really wanting to do anything other than have the people experience. Like in my previous profession of orthotist, prosthetist, I was good enough to where people would seek me out. The wine business is a lot different. You can make the best wine in the world, you still have to sell it. And that just wasn't me. And so I knew I was pushing up against that. I was having to have people come in. I was relying on them more. And, you know, you have to keep people busy. You have to keep them interested. I'm pretty, not boring, but I'm a pretty simple guy. And, you know, you have to work. I have to work at keeping them interested and keeping them, you know, challenged. So you just add it all up and you say, well, you know, let's do it. So I had some offers from some of the big boys, and I had kind of an unspoken agreement with the Marsh family that I wasn't going to sell to anybody, that I wasn't going to sell to somebody who's in the business for the money part of it. You know, it's like, well, who's that? You know, people who know how to monetize it, that sell millions and millions of barrels, or not barrels, but bottles of wine, or hundreds of thousands of them. I just kind of made a promise to him that I wasn't going to do that, to kind of keep the Dundee Hills spirit, the pioneering spirit. And so I had an opportunity to turn some people down. And then I had an opportunity, a couple that came in that were from San Diego, that, I mean, we just kind of clicked and really liked them. Really didn't talk about what they were going to do with it exactly, what they had planned to do with it, but did talk to them a lot about continuing on the thing with the school career and technical education program at Newburgh, and then keeping that going, whether it's through a bottle or through donation or whatever. Talked to them about the community aspect of it, and introduced them to the Marsh family, and they, you know, they liked them. So I figured, you know, this is the right time for me to do it. It was not an easy thing for me to do because my heart was in it. But whenever I got melancholy, or whether I second guessed myself, should I have done this or should I do this, I went down my punch list of all the reasons why I was going to sell Bella Vida. And it just made sense again, and it kept making sense. So if I ever drift off into, oh man, I wish I was in the grape business, because I don't. I mean, I've had my run. It's been absolutely great. And I have a new project now. And so I'm right where I was before. I just don't have grapes I'm growing now. I'm growing Douglas fir trees on a 65-acre parcel that has views of the Cascades all the way from Mount Rainier down to Mount St. Helen and the coastal range. So it's like I'm not at the beach, but I get to experience all those colors that occur when the sun goes down at the beach without that chilly marine layer every night here on this hill. We're at 1,250 feet. We've got 20,000 new plantings in of Doug fir trees. We've got a tasting room, and we have a tasting wine storage area up here so that we can sell off the final inventory that we have from Bella Vida. We still have a wine club. They still come out and participate with us as far as our events are concerned. And then after this is all over with, after we sell all of our wine, we do have an option because we are permitted to sell other people's wine through this facility. If we want to do that, we can do that. But I think it's going to be probably a balance between selling wines, events that occur here. We're not sure whether we want to do weddings. We did have a pretty good sized wedding as a starter for one of the contractors' daughters here. Coincidentally, her name was Bella, so thought it'd be a good place to have a wedding, and actually it turned out very nicely. The forest side of it, I've got 2 grandsons, so we're going to teach them to be independent and hopefully successful. But if they don't, they'll have a forest they can harvest when they're 55 years old and maybe have some boat money or some play money when it's all said and done. And then, of course, replant it for the next generation. So this is kind of an opportunity for us to be able to finish up with what we started as far as Bella Vida wines are concerned, and also support my grandkids as they get older as far as having a facility that has value to it. And it helps me and gives me something to do and keeps me out of trouble. Although I must admit that I'm going to, now that COVID's over with, and I don't have to worry about getting trapped, I've got a year-long trip through the wine. I'm going to start in New Zealand and then go to Australia. I want to go to Hanoi and Singapore just because they're close by. Go in the Croatian areas and try their wines up there, the Dalmatians Islands, and then swing to South Africa, and then go to Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, Switzerland, and then hop across the Napa-Sonoma area. I still think I'd like to make my last wine visit in that year up into Washington. I just really am really happy with what they're doing with their wines up there and making some stellar, delicious wines in that part of the area. So, yeah, so I have a big trip planned. I just have to stay healthy.
That's quite a year to look forward to.
Yeah, I know it. I mean, it's like I planned it before I sold Bella Vida. I was waiting for COVID to calm down. We sold in 21. And so now that it's calmed down, I'll be able to take those trips. Let my brother, who's up here helping me, he's got his tasting permit, his license or his permit. Veronica, my lady friends, they can play while I play here. It's kind of selfish, but I told Veronica, I said, Veronica, it's 60% cheaper for me to travel if I go by myself. And she was very supportive. She said, that's great. You go ahead and do that. Jim and I will just have fun up here by ourselves. And so I guess it was a good idea. Or I guess it is a good idea.
Last question for you. I want to talk about the industry a little bit more, kind of the neighborhood, especially the Dundee Hills neighborhood. I'm curious about the growth and change you saw in Oregon wine and in the neighborhood, and I guess sort of what the industry looks like to you now on the kind of this end of it.
As I mentioned, there's three events or 3 options as far as wine tasting. In '96 when I was first purchased the property, and now there's probably 20, and there's a lot of money that they've put into that area. But I mean, how would you expect them not to? They have these wonderful, internationally known Pinot Noirs. They still say that people don't know that much about us. there's still, you need to look for it, but there's still some sheds that you can find some really interesting wines in. We talked about it before the interview started. And there's still some kind of experiences that bring out the pioneering qualities that were the initiators to the wine business in Oregon. Some of the things have changed because of COVID. I mean, appointment only was a huge part of that. I think that helped calm down the tasting room traffic and make it a little bit easier for owners to be able to present their product, for the public and clients to appreciate the product, and then also ultimately sell the product to and have wine club members and stuff. I love the way that they've brought food into the tasting opportunities for people. And some of it's pretty sophisticated. Winemaker dinners are probably the most enjoyable events and occasions that I enjoy, just because it's the pairing of food. And it's food and wine go together great, but Pinot and food is phenomenal. That wines make the chef look better, and the chef makes the wines look better. It's one of those mouth-dropping experiences. And I don't go to them that often, but when I do go to them, I'm amazed. I'm amazed at the impact that the combination of the knowledge of the chef has, the training that they've had as far as the pairings of foods and wines together, how it just is such, it's like you're guaranteed to have a good time and a good experience and learn something as a result of doing it. It's just absolutely wonderful. Would I like to see a little bit more rural component? And I'm talking about Warden Hill Road just because that was my neighborhood. But it's true in Yamhill, Carlton. It's not quite as compact as it is on Warden Hill Road. But I'd like to have a little bit more distance between the wineries, not only for consumption purposes, but also to just for the experience. When you have 3 wineries that are on the same corner, or not the same corner, on the same intersection, it's that's a day of wine tasting. And to me, it's like enjoying the countryside and getting lost and getting reoriented again, and making a turn and being just absolutely astounded. Best examples, turn off at 99, you up 9th Street, it's residential, and it unfolds into this gorgeous kind of array of vineyards and kind of undulations of vineyards and farmland. It's just absolutely phenomenal. It's inevitable it was going to change. I think that, this change it doesn't have to do anything, but it's just all in how you embrace it. It's going to change. You don't have a lot to say about it. There's things like families not passing on vineyards to next generations. That's happening in Europe as well. It's just characteristic of, generations and farming. And so, would I like to see fewer places on Warden Hill Road? Yeah, but boy, the places that they put on there are absolutely stunning, and they're unique, and they offer a different experience or opportunity for the customers and clients that do it. In general, I think the wine business continues to be somewhat of a struggle. I do. It's not. It's with all the romance that's around it. It's work. Including taking the cork out of the bottle and screwing it. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a tremendous amount of money too. Nowadays, it's not for those who are gonna just plant it and harvest it and turn it into wine and sell it and be successful. It's a huge struggle because there's so much wine out there nowadays, and there's good wine out there too, and there's great Oregon Pinots. So I'm part of that. I was a part of that, and I enjoyed being a part of that, and still enjoy the wine that I get to drink with my friends as a result of being in that business. I got to see where it is today, and I'm proud that I was able to be part of that for as long as I would, and to be successful in it and happy too. It was really, you know, it was a good gig, and I'm sitting here now on top of the hill, and I've got black bear and cougar and elk and deer and coyote and bobcats around me, and I've got a tractor, I've got a chainsaw, I've got a weed whacker. I mean, I'm a happy man, and I've got a pretty good cellar. So if it really gets bad, I can always, you know, take a turn down my cellar and to open up a bottle of wine and enjoy that.
I think you could build a pretty good country song out of those lyrics. Black bear, tractor.
Black bear.
Yeah, I think you got it. All the questions that I have for you, anything I didn't ask that I should have, anything we didn't cover?
You know, we covered so much. I mean, it was such a fun trip for me to be able to remember all this stuff, and more importantly, just kind of share it with you guys. I'm really glad that you reached out and asked to interview me, and I'm looking forward to seeing the finished product and sharing it with other people.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. Taking the time, sharing your beautiful new space, sharing your story, sharing a little Oregon rain at the end of July. What a weird day this is. Thank you so much, and we'll let you off the hook.
Yes, you're more than welcome. Much appreciated.